Netherlands, a country with a large dairy production history, and where automation and technology and precision farming also have a large part to play in this game. And I welcome Dr. Henk Hoogeveen. He's a professor at Wageningen University and the chair in animal health management at the university. He's also part of the International Precision Dairy Farming Association that I am part of, and it's a great pleasure to have Henk today with us sharing his insights.
Well, thank you, Nick, for inviting me. Great to be here, although I'm looking to a screen and not to real people, so it's a bit of a different atmosphere, I have to admit. Is everything visible, by the way, Nicholas?
Yes, we can see and hear you fine, and we can see you too. So,
okay, well, even better. I'm not sure whether it's better, but anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for all the attention. Let's see, I click this one away for myself. Good, yeah, great. So I'm going to present in the next 25 minutes. So we'll skip a few slides if time is make that necessary. Something about automatic milking in the Netherlands, and especially lots of experiences, just because we have a long history. How do I go to the next slide? Oh yeah. First, who I am, I'll shortly, but I'm working in Wageningen, as well as in Utrecht, the veterinary faculty. I'm trying to connect and interlink economics with animal health, and I have an interest, quite a large interest, since my PhD thesis already in technology. And before I started working in university, which was 2001, I've been working at, amongst others, the Engineering Institute, where I was project leader of automatic milking at the time that was starting. Just a little bit about the Netherlands. You see a small map. It's a very small country. Only 41,000 square kilometers, while I searched for the city. The city of Sydney has 12,000 square kilometers as city, and our whole country is well, just 4 times as big. The population of 70 million and lots of dairy cattle. Well, you see a little map that is reached in the west of the country. That's mostly most people are living. In the east of the country is the more extensive areas. In the north, east are the areas where most dairy cattle is located. What can you expect from me here? A few words about the Dutch dairy industry, and then something about automated milking in the Netherlands. I'm going to say a few things about sensor system, because that's what our current work is aiming at, not at automatic milking anymore, but at how to use all the data, how to use all the information that we're collecting. And so I'm saying also in the end a few words about economics of that, because that's my field. The Dutch dairy system is basically a grass-based system, or at least a 2/3 grass-based system. It's getting more and more important just because of all kind of requirements regarding the environment. So in summer times, the typical ratio is fresh grass plus some corn silage plus concentrates. In the winter, it's grass silage plus corn silage plus concentrates. And in the winter time, that's given as some kind of a half mixed ratio. And although there has been a movement towards more confinement housing, because management is easier, getting cows in a high producing mode is easier when you house them, because then you have always a balanced diet, which is more difficult in the summer. And also because of automatic milking, the dairy industry, in terms of the milk processes, are really stimulating grazing. So they, for instance, giving premium prices for farms that graze their cows at least for 120 days during 6 hours per day. And you see that also farms with an AMS are moving that way, or moving back that way, because the premium is quite a nice premium. And here are some pictures of the way it works. Corn silage, well, it's all in now because it's now winter time here, and October, November is harvested. The storage is in big storage piles or bunker silos that are covered by plastic and dirt to maintain the quality. and the half mix ratio is done by mixing wagons, and they're nowadays also automated as nowadays. The dairy sector, like almost everywhere in the world, I would say, it's increasing farm sizes. It's the size of the farm is such way it's mostly owned family labor. There's only few farms that have real hired labor. As I said, a half grass-based system, and the system is also well, we see relatively volatile milk prices since a few years, and it was a time that the EU left out their guaranteed low milk price, which means that especially downwards the volatility is very visible and cost price is important. Yet on the other hand, in the Netherlands there is quite a pressure on the resource use, resources as nitrogen, phosphate and carbon, and that means that there's quite a number of challenges on the management. Some developments to be shown. The number of farms, the green bars, is going down. First quite steeply, since a few years a bit less steeply, although it might quicken again due to the regulations around nitrogen. And you see the production, the number of animals per farm and the total number of animals in the country increasing to 1.7 million cows at the moment, and some 85 dairy cows per farm. Production of 14 billion, almost 14 billion kilograms of milk, and we're highly dependent upon export. Only 35% of the produced dairy stays in the country. The remaining 65% is exported, of which 20% outside the EU, China, Japan, South Korea, the most important countries there, and 45% are exported within the EU, Germany, Belgium, and France, the most important countries. And as such, the dairy industry is 1.2% of the Dutch economy, and whereas agriculture is 8% of the Dutch economy. And that all in this little small country, 4 times as big as the city of Sydney, with 17 million people living side by side. That also gives quite some pressure on the system. Good, some words about automatic milking. Well, I think that the Netherlands has been on the forefront regarding automatic milking for many, many years, and it all started with the development of individual animal identification in the 1970s. That was a moment that we could identify individual cows, and then engineering researchers started to think about what can we do if you are able to identify individual cows. Well, you can use sensors, because if you sense something on a cow, you also know which cow it is. And one of the basic developments is the concentrate feeder that we all know, and that's very common use, but that's an idea from that as well. Somewhere in the 1980s, people thought about it might be possible to milk cows, maybe automatically or robotically or whatever. And this picture that you see is a very early picture of one of the first experiments, where at the Engineering Institute they created a one-stand milking parlor that cows could freely enter, and cows were wearing animal ID, and if they were seen, a student was standing beside that. And as soon as the screen said this cow should be milked, the student attached the milking cluster. And basically that was an idea to see, does it work, where cows go individually to a robot where they are milked, instead of that a farmer herds them into a milking parlor and there milks them, or in a tie stall where the farmer goes to the cow and milk them. Well, it did seem to work, and then development started further. First commercial farms with automated milking were in 1992. And currently, well, this slide is old, outdated. 90% of the farms that I have are newer slides with newer data. So the various types of milking machine, you can see that nowadays AMS, it's, oh, my screen not very visible. 26% of the farms are milking automatically, and that's 4,360 out of the 16,000. While the largest proportion is still the herringbone partner that were heavily built in the 1970s. But if you see to the new systems that were built in 2019, the big majority are milking robots, 73%, while the side-by-side parlor is second place, and especially on the larger farms, there are some rotary parlors installed. What you also can see is that the size of the farms with automatic milking systems is relatively equal to the average size in the Netherlands. Most farms have one robot on their farm, some two, and there is a few. Well, there's one farm with 7 and one farm with 8 robots. Yet again, we also have a relatively small proportion of very large, say around 500 cow herds in the country, although there's a few there. Something that might illustrate the growth of automatic milking. This is an aerial of the area where I grew up. The farm with the blue arrow to it, that's the farm where I grew up. And that was in the 1980s, 70s and 80s. And all of these blue circles, those were farms in that day. So there were quite a number of farms around us. If you now look at the same area, quite some farms quit, and more than half, which is, well that's visible, but that's also seen in the pictures I showed before. But of the farm that maintained, almost all robot, only 3 do not milk with automatic milking systems, and I know that one of those 3 is considering starting to have one. So that's something that went very quickly in the time being. I listened to the previous presentation, and when I prepared my presentation, I thought, well, there's not too many things that bother people. As you can see, 75% of the newly sold milking systems are automatic milking systems, and that means that there's no discussion anymore about topics. It works. It does work. It works with grazing, although with grazing you have to make a number of adjustments. You have to work there. The capacity of the milking robot goes down, and that's especially the economic question. Talking about economics, we've done in the past some research on that, and if you look at the money-wise, using an automatic milking system is more expensive than using a traditional milking system, and especially because it's own labor that is used. It's especially the replacement of your own labor with automation that motivated people to go into automatic milking systems. And at that time, and the data is also, I didn't present them on the slide, but at that time we did do some research into motivational reasons, and we compared farms that switched to automatic milking with farms that in the same year bought a normal milking system. And the reasons that farmers went into automatic milking had everything to do with labor, way of life, time, normal working days, those types of aspects. And the reasons that farmers invested in a traditional milking parlor, a conventional milking parlor, were reasons in the sense of, yeah, the robot is too expensive. So they used an economic argument to not invest in AMS, while a second reason was, well, it's more difficult to grow because you have to grow in fixed steps. Per robot, you have 50, 60, 70 cows, and if you want to grow, you have to do that in those steps. Otherwise, it's very inefficient milking. Having 2 milking robots for 90 cows is very inefficient, and that's a typical farm size is 90 cows in our country. But still, due to the way of life arguments and the free time, that's a thing. As one farmer once told me, well, I have the right, as my neighbors have, to just go with my kids to the football field in the early night while they can work. So those are the reasons. Grazing is a bit challenging, but doable. There has been some research done on that. I wasn't involved in that research, but it's doable. The only thing is, yes, your capacity goes down, but it's still doable. What you see happening is our current research really moves into the use of sensor systems, because that's where the challenges for us are, is that we generate loads of data using robots. In the early days, those were used to well, manage mastitis, because you have to use sensors to do that. You have to use sensors to detect clinical mastitis cases in order to treat them in time. But well, that works. Not perfect, far from perfect, I would say, but it works, and farmers are happy with that. We did see in the beginning some issues with increased somatic cell count. Still, somatic cell count increases a little bit if farmers switch, but the increase is way lower than it used to be. We're working on an evaluation of that, and the data are almost finished, not yet ready. So there's not that many challenges specifically for automatic milking left. But the challenges that are left is how to better make use of sensor systems. And that's not only usable for farms with automatic milking, but also for others. And we did do some recent research into the use of sensor systems. Now, what's that? How can you define it? Well, we often talk about sensors. And if you look at them, these consist of a number of aspects. The first is that there is a sensor, the red box, that's the sensor. And a sensor without an algorithm is nothing. So every sensor is accompanied by an alert algorithm that can be used to make decisions by the farmer. And of course, that decision-making process is can be supported by other data as well. But what you see then is that often the potential of the sensor is hardly used. So that's a sensor system. We did do a large questionnaire on Dutch dairy farmers with automatic milking system and without, of which we had 500 responses. And we got lots of permissions to connect the data of the farmers with the data from the milk production recording system, as well as that we could link it to accountancy data of 270 farms. So we could link the use of sensors with 400 farms, and as well as technically, as well as economically. Which farmers are used? Typically, of course, connectivity, because they're installed on milking robots, and but also there is a few farms with a conventional milking system that have connectivity sensors installed in their work. Well, there is a few farms at that time with LDH sensors. There are a bit more farms with somatic cell count sensors, and quite some farms with color sensors. What you see is the sensor system that has been heavily used. That's the use of pedometers or 3D accelerometers to detect estrus. And we could see that especially on the conventional milking systems, the farms that responded, quite a high percentage did work on that. And all other sensors, there's a few out there, and they're not that important. Good. In which year was invested, and this research was done in 2015, published in 2015, and the data collected in 2014, so it was up to 2013, and you see that in the early 2010s, there was quite an increase in the use of sensors. That was the moment that sensor systems changed, and what you can see is that the red bars that are the mastitis sensors, that are much more equally throughout time, because they were linked to automatic milking, and well, automatic milking is common technology since the very early 2000s. Reason to invest in sensor systems, and again, what you see is reducing labor is a very, very important reason in everything. While improving health and getting insight on health was the most important one, but without the reduction in labor, which is an economic aspect as well, but especially a social aspect, the system wouldn't be bought. Good, what do they have of an effect? I go a bit quickly because I see I have 7 minutes left. If you look at other health sensors, and interestingly, of course, if we look at other health sensors, we also look at automatic milking. Well, if you now look at the farms, we had some farms without sensors, so basically there were farms without automatic milking systems and without sensors. They were as large as the farms with AMS at the moment of start, and you see that farms, when they invest in sensors, that they grow, and that often happens because the investment in AMS is often linked to a new barn. The same thing you could see with the conventional milking system farms. On the 27,000 average before sensors, on the 59 on average after sensors, and that means that the sensors are bought as part of a new milking system and as part of a new barn. So you also saw that there is some growth out there. And what we also see is that the milk production of AMS farms was about equal to the CMS farms at the moment of investment, 8,000 kilograms, 400 kilograms approximately. And it grew a little on farms with an AMS, and it decreased a little on farms with a CMS. But also the growth in milk production per cow is not very large, despite the potential to milk more than 2 times a day. But of course, in reality, we see that farms are not milked 3 times per day. The average is that they milked 2.3, 2.4, maybe 2.5 times per day. And especially with grazing, that is impressive. Effects on udder health. The bars resemble the somatic cell count, and you see that the farm without the sensor system on average had the best somatic cell count. And yes, you do see an increase in somatic cell count from 213,000 to 225,000. It's an increase, but it's not a huge increase on farms without automatic milking. And you saw a decrease on the farms that invested in in another milking parlor, the farms, the CMS farms that invested in sensor systems. As to detection, I will I will skip the estrus detection effect, except that you see that the effects of reproduction are an improvement of reproduction, and that improvement is larger on CMS farms, on conventional milking farms, AMS farms with an automatic milking system. So apparently it has a positive effect on the days to first service and potentially to calving interval depth. Something interesting about economic potential versus reality, because we had real data, and if we look at the potential, we did do some research looking at the potential of estrus detection, and giving that research, we found a clear economic effect. So 11% internal rate of return, which means that the payback period was 7 years, and it's definitely an investment that pays itself back. So it's a good investment. But if you look at the real data, and these are expressed in dollars, US dollars per 100 pounds of milk, at the economic data, interestingly, at the profit, that's the figures underneath, show that the profit in terms of dollars per 100 pounds of milk is $2 at the no sensor farms. It's higher on the CMS farms, both before and after investment, but you see that the profit on AMS farms is decreasing somewhat, and that has everything to do with the higher investment costs. The capital costs are higher. The capital costs per 100 pounds of milk are definitely higher on farms with an AMS than on farms with a CMS. And the other side, the revenues were also a little bit higher, but that did not compensate the higher capital costs. And especially because the labor savings are own labor, you don't see that back in these types of accountancy data, because own labor is not paid, and it's paid by the final profit you make, and not by paying yourself salary. Although we did see a reduction of labor to be used. So research remarks now is automatic milking in the Netherlands is not the issue. It's the use of data, that's the issue. That's where the research projects are about. How to utilize data, how to support farmers, because it's easy to collect lots of data, and that's happening. And we're storing gigabytes of data nowadays, terabytes of data. But it's a challenge to make some use of that, and to use that to also support the farmer with management. And that is the coming field where we're working at. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henk, for your presentation. Really, it's impressive to see not only the amount of work that you're doing, but also the data that you have behind all the work that you're doing, and yeah, the research that is conducted from adoption, from potential, from economics, and the likes. So I congratulate you on that one. A couple of questions that came through, and I'll flick through them. Is, do you see that most of the farmers that are milking conventionally first adopt sensors and then move to AMS, or they move straight to AMS with sensors?
They move straight to AMS with sensors. So it's not that they are getting used to the use of sensors a little bit. What you see happening is that many farms went to AMS. Some of them really, we looked at economics, but we saw farms that went to an AMS while their conventional milking partner was only 8 years old, which means it's not depreciated at all. And it's typically a reduction of labor. Or maybe not a total reduction, it's the change of labor, being fixed to labor that you have to milk in the morning and in the afternoon. And that's 7 days a week, 5 to 2 weeks a year, except for 2 weeks of holidays. That's the reason that many switched. And they did so also often while their knowledge of sensors, the knowledge of automation was not that good. That also is a difference in the effects that we used to see on, for instance, other health that had everything to do with the use of computers. Nowadays, the young farmers are much more computer literate, of course. So it's not that they need to learn sensors first and then dare to switch. It's a deliberate choice to go to another conventional milking parlor instead of robot. Although nowadays the availability of paid labor is an issue, and if you can't find them, then that's one of the reasons that larger farms may also switch to automatic milking. But that's it's still the majority of the larger farms stay with side-by-side parlors or by rotary parlors.
Excellent. The other question was, do you see, like we talk about a robotic system, and every time a cow comes in, collecting between 150 and 200 data points for every cow visit. Do you see that the user of that information is the farmer, is the advisor, or is the combination of both?
I think it's mostly the farmers are using that. But what we also saw, we've been doing a little work on that, is to teach the advisor. And of course, there's lots of knowledge in advisory services, but for instance, veterinarians, well, there's quite a number of veterinarians out there, and they have to learn to use the data as well. So you have to learn advisors to have a look at the enormous amount of data that is available and can be retrieved from the system, and make some sense of that. That's something that is also for them. So for instance, the veterinary faculty, we've created some courses for vets in education to learn about using the, data to interpret these data, but also to learn them with the different systems, because that's an interesting thing. You know, there's more systems out there, and typically if we use management system for ourselves, we have one system that we use, and now we have to work with 3 or 4 or 5 systems. In the Netherlands, we have 6 systems on the market, but there's 2 or 3 large ones. Yeah.
I think that's an excellent initiative, and I think it's something that will happen more and more in the future. Last question is, what other sensors do you see coming into the future and being incorporated into AMS?
Well, SOS detection definitely. And the interesting thing about SOS detection, it's a clear management link to that. So SOS detection, it's great because we have a sensor system. It sends an alert that a cow might be in estrus, and we know what to do that is after the volunteering waiting period, we inseminate. Clear management associated with clear objectives for the census system. There's quite some work being done on metabolic, using sensors to get insight in the metabolic status, and that can be rumination time, it can be pH of the rumen, it can be number of eating bouts, all these types of things. And we're working on that, but we have a little problem there is, yes, metabolic situation is important, but what do we want to detect in a cow? And what's the management that we associate with that? So we're not replacing, and now that's the interesting part, we're not replacing any existing management. We're adding novel management and novel potential and stuff that our fathers didn't do, and stuff that the farmers never thought about. And that's also something that they have to start using it, as do the researchers have to realize that we have to connect the engineering to clear management. And especially on the management part, we're lacking info, and it's great to look at graphs and see, hey, we saw, you know, this cow is now has cutodes, and here 3 days before we saw something happening. But the point is, if something is happening, how do we adjust? What do we do? How do we start?
Excellent, Henk. Well, I think we've got to leave it there. It's fantastic and fascinating. I think we will have to bring you back for more on this, probably not at 7 o'clock in the morning, I promise. We can find a more suitable time. I can see it's dark outside from your window. But I do appreciate your time and your knowledge. It's been really fantastic. And once again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Bye.
It's a pleasure. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.